Okay. Hi, everybody. Just waiting for a couple more attendees to roll in, but as a brief introduction, welcome. My name is Dustin Fleischman. I'm the Director of Events and Communications here at the Writers Guild Foundation. And welcome to our event, Putting Pregnancy and Abortion Storylines into Context in partnership with Storyline Partners. Brief intro about the foundation. We're the nonprofit arm of the WGA West, and it's our mission to preserve and promote the craft of writing for TV. So we host public events just like these, panels, workshops, all with writers and industry experts. We also have community programs that help kickstart writers' careers and a bunch of phenomenal resources for the grading writing community to tap into. You don't even have to be a member of the WGA to take advantage of our resources. And perhaps our biggest resource is going to be the library that we have. That's at the WGA HQ here in Los Angeles. It is open to the public by appointment only, and it houses tens of thousands of scripts from produced movies and TV shows. So you can learn more about our library and everything the foundation has to offer at our website. I'll throw the link in the chat. I'll also throw the link to subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't done so already. That's the place to learn about any news and updates from the WGF. And then just quick housekeeping about Zoom. I hope this isn't your first time using Zoom, but if it is, or if you just need a quick refresher, please direct your questions to the Q&A box in the lower window of your Zoom window. And then feel free to engage in the chat. If you ask a question in the chat, there's a good chance that we won't see it. So definitely make sure that you're putting those questions in the Q&A box. We also do have closed captioning available by hitting the Show Captions button. Again, that's in that Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your window. And that's about enough out of me. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things over to Sanaz at Storyline Partners.
Thank you so much, Dustin, and thank you all, including the writers and our members, for joining us today. My name is Sanaz, and I'm Executive Director of Storyline Partners. We are a nonprofit collective of cultural consultants representing 15 issues and community-based organizations that actively advise on narratives, entertainment narratives. This panel is the third in a series promoting issues and communities affected by the upcoming elections and the narratives surrounding them. Two of our member organizations representing the Better Life Lab, Vicki Shabo, our moderator, and Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health, our issue expert, Steph Herold, will be in dialogue with both Elena and Charlotte. For more information, please check us out at storylinepartners.com. And now to Vicki. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. Huge thank you to Dustin and the team at the Writers Guild Foundation and to Sanaz and our other friends at Storyline Partners. So I am a policy person. I've worked on gender equity issues for the last 15 years at the policy and advocacy level, and 2 years ago started a project here at New America, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C., called Rescripting Gender, Work, Family, and Care. And our goal is to have more and more authentic and more aspirational representation of the ways that people live and work and care for one another on screen. So I'm really excited to be here today to put those stories about people's reproductive health decisions about whether, when, and under what circumstances to become a parent. So thinking about pregnancy and abortion in the context of people's full lived experiences with respect to what it is that we all are dealing with when we need to decide about having a family or not. And so super excited to be here with my partners in crime today. We have Charlotte Stoudt, who is currently show running The Morning Show on Apple TV and recently received Variety's Showrunner Award at the SCAD TV Festival. She's built a career in premium drama from Homeland to House of Cards to Fosse Verdon, and you can read a lot more about her on the event webpage. Elena Crevello, a TV writer, actor, director, and producer, whose most recent credits include writing and producing for Peacock's TED Season 2, NBC's American Auto, Netflix's Grace and Frankie, and for Vida on Stars, lots of shows about and for women. And last but definitely not least, my partner in crime here, Steph Herold, who's a researcher at Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health, or ANSWER, where she studies the portrayal of abortion on television and in film with the Abortion on Screen program. And as a point of personal privilege, I will say that Steph is like the best collaborator. We have a fact sheet to share with you that we just did together. And it's always a joy to work with her on this, to think about these intersectional stories that need to be told, that tie issues together, and that reflect that people live full lives and should live full lives on screen and not have storytelling in silos. So I am going to just kick us off with some really brief sort of level setting about what's happening in America today. As Sanaz said, this series is about issues that are in the national debate with respect to the election. And obviously reproductive health and reproductive health decisions, caregiving, and families' economic security are front and center right now in this conversation and with respect to what's at stake. So as folks, I'm sure the folks on this call know, or on this webinar know, the landscape with respect to reproductive health in the United States and access to abortion care changed dramatically in the middle of 2002 when Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court in a decision called the Dobbs decision. In that aftermath, we now have 25 states that have significantly restricted or banned abortions. Many more had barriers in place before that were also making it very difficult for women, and particularly women of color and women with lower incomes, to receive abortion care. It's gotten even worse. And this has real life and death consequences. I would be remiss not to mention two stories that have been in the news in the last couple of days. The first two cases in Georgia of women whose deaths were ruled preventable had it not been for the fear and the restrictions that have been imposed by Dobbs and made possible by Dobbs, imposed by the Georgia legislature with respect to access to reproductive care, penalties for doctors and other medical providers that have scared medical professionals in terms of the care that they're willing to provide, and made pregnant people reluctant to find care. So we find ourselves in a landscape where people's reproductive freedom is being curtailed and where there are enormous barriers. And so we're going to talk some today about those barriers on screen. Each of our two esteemed industry panelists have done stories that reflect this. But just really quickly, about 68% of women of reproductive age who said that they had difficulty getting abortion care or know somebody had to travel to another state. 40% didn't know where to go. 35% had cost barriers. 28% needed to take time off of work, and 14% needed to find childcare. And this last part is really important because 55% of people who are seeking abortions are already parents. So this is something that isn't often represented on screen. We're going to talk more about that. Most people who are abortion seekers are in their 20s or older. They tend to be women of color. They tend to struggle to cover the cost of abortion care. And many of them live with financial hardship. So that is sort of who we're talking about in real life. As Steph will tell us, that's not necessarily always true on screen. And then the piece of this that to me is also just very important, and where we need to break out of silos, is in the economic factors that affect whether and when people decide that they can or can't have children. And that's in the context of childcare costing more than a public university in 28 states, childcare for 2 children costing more than rent in every state in the United States. We live in a country that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave to workers. There are some states that are exceptions, but in general, just 27% of workers in the US have paid family leave to care for a baby, and that is much less for people with lower wages. Just about 6% have access to paid family leave. And most people in the US who don't have children, people who are under 50, 36% say that they can't afford it. So we're really in this situation where people are struggling to make ends meet, struggling with reproductive health decisions, and unable to get the care that they need. So with that rosy picture, and these stats, Dustin can drop a link in the chat, but Steph and I made a nice little fact sheet for this with tips for writers for this event, and we'll have it on our website as well. And Dustin can drop that in the chat, but it's newamerica.org/abortionfastfacts. And we've got many more resources as well that we can talk about. So I told you a bit about what is happening sort of in the US. And Steph, you've done a lot of research on what's happening on screen. I wonder if you can just give us a quick rundown, and then we'll turn to Charlotte and Elena to tell us about some of their more exceptional storytelling, which is just juxtaposed against kind of your overall findings.
Thank you, Vicki. Well, thanks for having me, and excited to be here to talk with all of you. So as many of you know, abortion has always been part of TV and film history, from the early silent films to today's multiplicity of streaming options. And broadly, our research finds that though it's the way that TV portrays abortion that is often not reflective of the American abortion experience in a couple of ways, and Vicki kind of hinted at some of them, right? Demographically, TV characters who have abortions tend to be younger, whiter, and wealthier than their real-life counterparts. They also are rarely parenting at the time of their abortions, when in real life, most people who have abortions are raising children. The characters face few, if any, barriers to abortion access. So if they want an abortion, they can often get one pretty easily. Whereas, as Vicki noted, pregnant people in the US face nearly insurmountable logistical, financial, and political barriers to care. We very rarely see the abortion itself on screen. Often it's a disclosure of a past abortion, or we see the front of a clinic, or maybe the waiting room if we're lucky. And when we do see it, it's often a procedural abortion, which is notable because today the most common type of abortion that people have is a medication abortion, an abortion by pill. We, as Vicki mentioned, rarely see the context in which the abortion decision is being made, right? So we don't see the character asking for time off work. We don't see them asking for a ride. We don't see how they come up with the $500 or more at the drop of a hat to pay for the cost of the abortion. We're over the last 2 years or so since the Dobbs decision, we're seeing more characters have to travel across state lines for their abortion, which has been great to see that some of that has kind of penetrated from real life to the screen. But really what we're seeing is stories that focus almost explicitly or almost exclusively on Texas, which is obviously very important, but this is something that's happening nationwide, not just in the South, but also in the Midwest. Also across Appalachia, also across the South. And as Vicki noted, we also aren't seeing characters talk about, having to find childcare or pay someone to watch their kids. So although we've found over the last decade in particular, there's been a real increase in depictions of abortion on screen that has not really correlated with an increase in the accuracy in terms of how they reflect real people's experiences accessing abortion.
Thank you so much, Steph, for that overview. And we will talk about better examples. I noticed somebody in the chat talked about a Grey's Anatomy episode that Steph and I have talked about a lot. And there have been some great stories on that show and on others that do put things into context, that do talk about overall. And in fact, that Grey's Anatomy episode that Eliza in the chat is noting is one where there was childcare acknowledged, and the need, the mom who was managing all sorts of things while she was being driven, and then had a tragedy. So get more into that, but I'm going to turn now to Charlotte and Elena. We're so excited that you're here to share your craft with us and some of your backroom stories. On the morning show, for example, this last season, that viewers have seen included many different ways of referencing abortion, different characters of different ages, helpers, commentators, stories that had happened in the past in a couple of instances. And the one that I loved most was where one of the characters sort of hears that the decision is coming down and both tells somebody else why it is that even though they live in New York, they should care about this and what the threat is. I thought that was incredibly important, because so much of what you hear is, oh, we're fine wherever we are in New York or California or DC, where I am, but that's not actually true. There are implications. And I loved that the morning show pointed that out. And the high stakes, particularly for Black women who face racism in the healthcare system and racism and sexism going back decades. And then Elena and her episode on American Auto, which really got into, in a very hilarious way, what abortion restrictions mean in workplaces and what role women should have in determining the right solutions to accommodate the unfortunate circumstances post-ops. So Charlotte, I'm going to turn it to you first. I'd love for you to talk a bit about the morning show and the process on the morning show of coming up with these stories. And just reflect a little bit on how it was that you were able to tell both so many and more holistic depictions of what American women are facing.
Sure. I mean, I am so aware, you know, the show is sort of about, you know, people without real problems. Basically, it is a very privileged people who live in Manhattan, and, you know, they dress beautifully and their hair always looks amazing. But within that, I think one of the interesting things I just started on the show in season 3 was because of this level of gloss, some things you will hear some things that if something comes at you and is like, I'm earnest, you might go, yeah, okay. But I think the morning show does have sometimes that ability to slip stuff in because the rest of it is like candy and is fun. So it actually kind of gets in before you really notice. So certainly at the beginning of season 3, we knew when the writer's room started, we knew there was going to be a decision, you know, and we knew it was probably going to go a bad way. But we thought it was going to be in June or July, you know, when most of the decisions come down. So we knew we wanted to talk about it in some way. And I just want to say I am kind of like your average liberal urban dwelling reader on these things. So I feel like I'm not very educated, but what we were able to do was speak directly with people who are on the front lines. We spoke to people who were bringing pills from Mexico, people who we spoke to abortion, a doctor who provides abortion in Texas, and she talked about all the death threats that she gets on pretty much a daily basis. So I really want to first say that if anything is interesting or effective in the show, it really comes from people on the ground and not from, you know, I'm just trying to get it in there. So I credit the people really doing the difficult work for everything that came in. And it was funny when our researcher was like, I think it's medication. I think we should focus on medication abortion. I was like, what? So I was as ignorant and limited in my thinking about it as, you know, there might be, or just uninformed, perhaps not ignorant, but just uninformed. So again, I was so grateful that people were like, make it about medication abortion. Don't make it just a blanket sort of general abortion story. So I kind of wanted Alex's, in the story initially, Alex is not as focused on why this is an important story to tell. And it's only when she gets into the details and finds out about these clinics that are sometimes often misleading when people come in for care that she gets a little bit fired up and stuff. So I guess we were blessed with experts who kind of said, talk about this, not this, or this is how it really is. So that helped us a lot. And then when the leak happened in May, we were already planning an episode that was going to be a Met Gala episode, which was May 2nd, the same day. And I was interested. As soon as that happened, I was like, oh, fancy people in amazing costumes in New York and abortion like women at the height of their power and their fierce warrior goddess outfits as their rights are being taken away. So I was interested in the tension between those things. Because it's television, the Met Gala became a party on an existing set of the show. So, but whatever, I think that was fine. But it was important. I was trying to the extent that I could put privileged people up against privileges being removed. I think that felt like something worth trying to say. I will say it is amazing how frightened people still are of the word abortion. It is, you would just, and I'm sure, Elena, you've had this same experience. Like, it's just unbelievable how frightened people are to talk about it. You're just like, really? How can that possibly? It is the case. It is the case. So basically, I just wrote like, here are the 6 times we're mentioning abortion. Here's the context in which we're doing it. Can we put this through? Like, it was, you know, please
Yeah.
sing. Can I have some more? It really is that.
And you did it. And yeah, I think we may have some questions later about how that went. But we can come back to that piece of the conversation. I also just want to say, I feel like the morning show also did a really nice job in the context of calling out that not everybody has the same privilege, even within the workplace. And that was in the context of equal pay. So that was another one of my favorite moments of the last season, is where one character calls to task a rich white man and says, what are you doing for Black women? And he says, well, you're taken care of. And she's like, yeah, and everybody else here isn't. And so that interdependence really stuck out to me as well, and it's something we over here really love to see. Elena, I'm going to turn to you and to talk about the American Auto episode that was 100% different than the morning show treatment. Hilarious, satirical. Tell us about the process there and sort of how you came to the story of this workplace grappling with who gets to decide what a travel policy looks like, and how to manage this issue in a workplace where people are now forced to travel for healthcare.
Yeah, so that room we actually started in June 2022. So it was obviously something we were talking about. And my showrunner for that show, Justin Spitzer, he also created Superstore, and he loves, diving into hot button topics. So I think from the beginning, he knew, like, we got to figure out a way to do something about this. But, American Auto was on NBC. It's not like this is on a streamer. This is a network show and a comedy. So figuring out how to tackle abortion as a comedy, and, networks really want to straddle both sides to some extent. And it's not like they were like, oh, you have to, show this exactly, but it's like, you want to make sure you have this balance of representation in the story, which can be hard. And so with that, it was just, we knew from the beginning it wasn't going, we had actually, I think we, at some point we had talked about maybe like a character having an abortion, but it was like, that's just not going to fly. So this is about the policy at the company. And this is supposed to be a car company. So presumably they have outlets all over, plants and whatever, all over the nation. So we just felt like it would be funny. I mean, one of the funniest things we came up with was that it ends up being the men deciding, just because of the way the day played out, it's just the men deciding where these women are going to stay, but also just, to keep it comedic, it's like deciding what hotel chain they're going to be staying at after their abortion. I mean, it's insane, it's inane, it's silly. But because that's the way you can get these stories into a comedy. So it's obviously a very different approach. We do try to squeeze in, that was one thing I tried to fight for, is getting in some information throughout the episode. So it doesn't feel just completely like we're not taking this seriously, and obviously I think just tackling it all shows that we do care about this. And I think it was immensely cool of the studio and the network to go for it. And actually the last show I wrote on, we might also be having an episode touching on similar areas. It's also a Peacock show, so it's exciting. We'll see. I shouldn't say anything because I'm like, I don't know if it's out yet. Who knows in the editing, but it's exciting.
Yeah. So for each of you, Elena and Charlotte, you've sort of talked about, staking out what you wanted to do, raising that with decision makers and gatekeepers. I'm wondering if either of you have sort of insights or anything to share about the process of kind of getting the stories approved, getting the content in. And also what was most, as you were writing in the room, or as the writers were writing in the room, what was most challenging about all of this?
Do you want to start, or however you like?
No, you go ahead, Charlotte.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it is, I do note the irony that here we are talking about how much dancing is involved in getting these stories through. It's kind of extraordinary that we're still having this conversation in 2024. It is insane. let's just take a moment and agree on that. Yeah, I think for me, just because this is a, morning show is a very star-driven show, it's really about, giving these actors, great material because they're sort of the reason people are tuning in. And I found it was easier to attach to pitches to character. Like, this is why this person should go through this. This is what they learn from this. This allows them to say a thing that they've been thinking about for a while, or they're feeling bad about this. So when this topic comes up, so to kind of tying it to specific characters, and that helped a lot, So it's like Alex goes and does an abortion story because she's mad at the guy with the rocket, like, as opposed to like, Alex feels very strongly about these fake clinics, and, like, just putting it in that, it sort of goes through more easily. But again, it's kind of astonishing we even have to talk about this. Sorry.
Yeah,
Anyway.
that's really interesting. And also that the older character who sort of says, I didn't really have this choice, as part of a context of like this mother-son dynamic with the Billy Crudup character.
Oh, yes.
Too.
Yes.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And that too, to what you're saying, comes from a story that's about something else. And it's a piece of that story, and an important piece of the story in the context of what was happening with Dobbs. I appreciated that as well.
I'll just add super
Yeah.
quickly that another thing that worked for us is that, because the show started out, it was looking at sexual misconduct. So it's always been a show about bodily to me, it's about women's autonomy. That's the show as a whole is about that. And for me, it all, because like fundamentally we are embodied. So everything does come down to the body, if you ask me. So it was also easy to pitch, it was easier to pitch as like, this is what the show does. And if we don't do it, people will go, why didn't you? And I do think that, I mean, I'm sure most people remember the day that leak came out, we knew it was coming, but that language from like that Alito used, like just the I mean, we've all just, you just are so angry. You just have to put it. And it was so gratifying to have Chris just get really, really mad. She was sort of carrying everybody's. And then it was interesting because we're writing season 4, and that question of what you brought up is most people would feel that way regardless of their experience, but it turns out that she's had a particular experience that is informing her rage.
Yeah, interesting. Elena, how about you and the context on American Auto? Yeah.
I do remember we had to temper, some stuff, and the hardest storyline for us was the storyline with the guys, and I think because we were trying to show the hypocrisy of these men making these decisions, we really took it to like a very funny, ridiculous place. I won't get into the details of it, but it was, we had to rewrite those scenes quite a few times to find the right balance, so it didn't feel offensive, but we had some very funny versions of what these clueless men were pitching for these women, or what they, them being so clueless about what abortion entails. And I felt like that was actually an interesting and fun way to kind of highlight what does abortion entail, to have these clueless men going the wrong direction. But yeah, there was a lot of rewriting from what I remember. It was rewriting those scenes with the men the most.
May I ask you what the episode title is of the?
Yeah,
I'm dying to see this. So, yep.
It's called The Letter. It's from season 2.
The Letter. Thank you.
Welcome. I think it's episode 6.
Steph, I want to turn to you to put some of this in context and why it matters. So, there's sort of the good story, there's the outrage, there's the humor. But what do we know from research about how audiences take what they see on screen with respect to abortion and what it means to them? And then if you can talk a little bit about, your most interesting forthcoming research about kind of the category of characters that are depicted in a more holistic way. Let's start with the research first. Yeah.
Sure. So in our research, we've tried to understand, what impact does viewing these stories have on people's knowledge about abortion, their attitudes about abortion, their willingness to take any kind of action. And we've only studied a couple of plot lines. We're still kind of delving into this area of research, but mostly what we found is that compared to people who don't watch these shows, if they have medically accurate information, people do retain that after the episode. So particularly when it comes to medication abortion, where people are kind of very confused about the difference between abortion by pill and Plan B, including any kind of accurate information about, what medication abortion is, how people take it, what it does, how safe it is. People remember that, especially if it comes out of the mouth of a doctor character who is seen as kind of trustworthy. And even though they're fictional, they're still kind of seen as a source of medical information. So that's been really interesting for us to track across a couple of different shows. We also found that watching plot lines that have characters supporting each other, either before, during, or after an abortion, led people to say that they would be more willing to support someone that they know who's seeking an abortion. And that was really interesting for us to see. What I'd really like to find out is if that actually bears out in real life. Does it actually lead people to do that, or are they just kind of saying, oh yes, I would do that now? Like, we don't know. And most recently, we found out that exposure to some plot lines led people to take some kind of action. And usually it was a pretty low cost to entry action, like looking up information about abortion online or posting about abortion on social media. But the fact that just watching something on TV for 20 or 30 minutes led people to do that was really interesting for us to see. So I'm hoping we'll be able to do more research in the future to help us understand what the connections are. And we really did not find that, people's attitudes towards abortion changed as a result of watching these shows. So that was really interesting for us to see too, that most people who are tuning in are already pretty supportive of abortion, which makes sense. When you think about the shows that have abortion plot lines, it's going to be people who are already pretty supportive watching those shows. But what they seem to do is increase people's support. People who are already supportive, it made them a little more supportive. So to me, that actually seems even more important than changing someone's mind, because it's really hard out there right now when it comes to abortion, right? And the more that we can kind of give people ways to feel good and arm them with more information, the better. And then in terms of the second piece of your question, I have some new research coming out, hopefully next year. You really never know with academia. That looks at how characters who are moms who've had abortions are portrayed. It's really fun to do as a mom. And part of what I've found is that compared to characters who are not parenting, so the majority of characters who are moms tend to talk about all this context, right? It's like part of the show and part of the plot line, that they're talking about work, and they're talking about balancing childcare and work, and they're talking about how they pay for things, and they're talking to their partner about their decision and making pro and con lists. So that came up a lot more for mother characters and for characters who didn't have kids, which I thought was really interesting to see. And it made me wonder, what audiences took away from that. So I hope we'll get to study that in the future.
Right. I thought that was really interesting too, because in the research that you and I did together and sort of your overall database, only about 5% of abortion storylines included that context. But when you had mother characters in this new research that you're talking about, there is more context. And so maybe that's something, to the point Charlotte was making earlier about, like, it's just more perceived, at least by people who are telling the story or gatekeeping the story, that it's more authentic to the character to be thinking about the context. But a huge number of college students in this country have children, and that would enter pregnancy, just like whether they can find childcare as they're going to school is a huge issue. I have colleagues who work on student parent issues here, and people who are not married, don't already have a child, but are caring for a parent or a sibling, have huge caregiving responsibilities that might factor into whether or not they're able to become a parent or have a subsequent child. And so telling these stories normalizes these decisions in ways that hopefully will start to destigmatize the concept and the word. And to the point that was made before, it becomes more normal to talk about abortion as a form of healthcare as well as freedom and a right. I am curious now, just sort of thinking about the future, and for all of you really, but I'll start with Charlotte and go to Elena. Are there stories you're eager to tell or that you want to see more of? What do you want to do in writing characters and stories that both like move the needle, are authentic to the character, and let audiences see something they haven't seen before or haven't seen enough of?
I think, I'm still on the show, so this is the canvas I have, and it still remains a show that's it retains its glossiness, so that's part of its charm. But as I said, we did try something this year that was bold for our world, and I was thinking a lot about just what you say. Like, I'm so aware of how I do not have children, but I'm so aware of how the world just isn't built for mothers in any way. Writers' rooms are not built for mothers in any way. They aren't. And you have your own thing about, when you're running a show, you need people, you need them all the time, you need their brains focused on the story, you got so much to get done. And the actual honest attention to a small being is going to take a lot, a lot of your mental. So it was a year where my writers taught me about things that maybe I hadn't thought thoroughly enough about. And then we tried to put that into the story. I think for me, I'm always trying to get out from under the thinking that is it's the air we breathe, the water we drink, like everything, just to try. And your thing of these men jokingly trying to figure out these rules sounds like the perfect way to do it. Like, it's very hard to get out of the mindset. I find as a writer, that's very hard to get out of the mindset of the thing. Like, you push so hard just to get a simple thing. Like, let's have a character just talk about medication abortion. As a reporter, like, that's pretty safe, isn't it? And then you worked so hard to get that in, they kind of sand it down a little, and you're kind of like, but wait, we're trying to do the thing over there. And you realize you got 10% of the way, maybe. So I guess that's not really a specific answer, but I guess I'm just still struck by like how radical we could be that we aren't, and how this is still not designed. Like, you still have to do an independent movie, like, oh, forgive me, the Jenny Slater movie, that very famous movie about the
Obvious Child.
obvious child. You still have to do something like that to really go all the way there, and it has to be an indie movie instead of a show. And that I'm like, why is that still happening? And honestly, I do think that's about, if women are at the very top of the TV food chain with the executives, then you're going to get more of that. I do feel, and it's still like a lot of women are the second person, and then the person on top of them is the guy,
Well,
is the-
and and I want to have Elena answer the original
sorry.
question, but I also know, I mean, this is making me also think about something we talk a lot about and focus on, which is also bringing men along in this conversation and having male characters depicted as supporters, having male characters do some learning that, can be modeled for folks in real life. I don't know how that fits into this conversation quite yet, but let's go to Elena to answer the question about sort of what you want to see more of or what stories you want to tell. But I do want to come back to this men point a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I guess for me, I write from a very like personal place. I always kind of write from what's going on in my life. I have a 2-year-old now, so I am trying to write, like, I have written some stuff about being a parent, and around that, I haven't found anyone who's necessarily interested in that quite yet. But hopefully, I just sold a script I wrote 6 years ago. So it's like, you never know when things are going to happen. But yeah. And same with when I'm in the writer's room, like, I'm always kind of trying to push stories for the female characters that are a little more, feel more exciting to me, maybe more relevant, not just comedic fodder, you know, like you want them to be funny since I am writing comedy, but I'd like to try to find more of like a resonance, something that like me or my peers, people I know, like struggles that we're all going through, especially being a working mom, like, and working in television and the writer's room. And I've been really lucky. Like I have been on shows, we have pretty regular hours. I get home at a decent time. So that has been great. But yeah, it is tough. And it is something that like, for some reason, we really also don't show like working moms on TV very much. That's something that I would really like to do something about. Right.
Yeah. So I'll just share, we did some research here with MarketCast, which is a firm that works in the industry and mostly does marketing plans and other media research. And we had them talk to streaming viewers, do some quantitative research and some social media analysis with streaming viewers, both on viewers' own work family experiences, finding that 55% of really avid streaming viewers have encountered or are currently dealing with a work or family or caregiving challenge. Most of those have experienced, or a strong plurality of those have experienced financial challenges or job challenges as a result. About the same percent believe they will experience a work, family, or care challenge in the next 5 years. And they are hungry to see these stories on TV. So 84% of streaming viewers said that they would be interested in seeing their own work, family, and care challenges depicted on screen more often, and only about half feel like they see that on TV now. And they wanted to see, about 60% said that they wanted to see, to your point, Elena, women who are both succeeding at work and being loving parents at home rather than one or the other. They wanted to see men who are providing hands-on care to children and to loved ones who are also working rather than being like a stay-at-home dad. Or a manny. They wanted to see people who spoke with pride rather than apology about parenting and caregiving. They wanted to see more supportive workplaces, bosses and colleagues who were supportive of parents and caregivers in workplaces. And they wanted to see people who were looking for and finding solutions around paid leave or childcare or workplace wages or control over schedules or workplace flexibility. And they found that on social media, the shows that had those themes actually generated more conversation among viewers who were talking about watching the show or their own experiences and encouraging other people to watch. And so I thought that was fascinating research that also hopefully is useful to storytellers who want to convince or show executives that there's market for this and that they will help grow their audiences. I'm happy to share that research in the chat also, but people want to see this. And what was most interesting is it was Gen Z that really wanted to see these stories. It was people who have children. So parents, both moms and dads, who wanted to see these stories. It was people with sort of middle to lower incomes. And it was Latino and Black viewers that wanted to see this. So all of the audience segments that companies want to grow are really interested in seeing these stories. Steph, I'll ask you the same question, I guess. What do you want to see more of?
Before that, I think just thinking about something Charlotte said about if there are women at the top, and I really struggle with that, I think, because I think abortion stigma is just so prevalent and it gets women too. And just hearing, about both of you talk about how hard it is, I just think that there's this concern from anyone at networks that abortion is not something that audiences want to see or want to hear about, whether they're a woman or a man. And I think part of the work that's so hard for you that I just hear about is trying to convince people that abortion doesn't have to be sad or tragic or make this one episode unpopular, or make a character unrelatable. That on the contrary, like abortion is a very popular issue among Americans. That's why it wins on every ballot measure in every state that it's been in so far. So many people have personal experiences with abortion. They're not always tragic. In fact, they're often like very boring and regular, or they're people's best ever experience of healthcare, because abortion providers are often so loving and so passionate about their work that they provide this high quality standard of care that I know at least I don't get when I go to my primary care provider. So I've just been marinating on that. But relatedly, I think what I would really love to see, and what I always say is kind of like my pie in the sky dream, is like multiple shows that focus entirely on abortion. So it's not just like one storyline that happens in one season, and then by the next season, the characters entirely have moved on and no one talks about the abortion at all. I'd love to see like a workplace comedy about an abortion clinic. I'd love to see like a group, like a drama about abortion funds and how they, help people get money for the abortions that they need. I would love to see like a time traveling abortion provider. Like I have many fantasy ideas that I'm sure would never really happen. But I have the privilege of not having to actually talk to any of the executives, so I can just kind of like brainstorm and think aloud. But anchoring a show in everything that's true about abortion, that abortion is about love, it's about power, it's about sex and family and death. And like there's just so much juicy material in there. So I just hope that one day, I know that people are writing these shows. I know that they're writing these amazing storylines and episodes. So I just hope one day it's not risky to resource them to put these shows on the air.
Love
I
those.
do think I'll just say, and yes, I don't want to like gender everything, and certainly, obviously, they're tremendously supportive men on the show I work on, and all that. So yeah, I don't want to suggest that it's all
For sure.
gender. Yeah.
No, I think, yeah, this has been great. We have a couple of audience questions, and actually this one kind of ties into the opposite of what we've been talking about, and it's a question for Steph, which is, do you have information on how anti-abortion groups and activists are portrayed in the media? And is there anything there that you would like to see changed?
Good question. Most often when they're portrayed in kind of like mainstream media, so not like anti-abortion Christian media that they create, often they're shown as the protesters at the clinic, and that's really it. Like you see a lot of shouting people with signs. That's the most common. And I think what's missing there is kind of like the way that the conservative right has built this systemic power, ever since Roe happened in 73, right? So it portrays them as these kind of like scrappy activists. And like, of course, there's that faction, but there's also like the people in suits who are just as fancy as the characters on the morning show, right? Who are just as wealthy, who are running around DC lobbying, and have all this power and do these shady backroom deals. And we really don't see that kind of side, like the powerful anti-abortion lobby. Like you don't hear about them. We don't see them on screen. So I'd be curious to see more of that.
Yeah, I feel like Mrs. America might be like the closest depiction to that I can think of.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a question up here as well. We touched on this a little bit, but a question that is, are there experiences in pregnancy and parenting that you struggle to incorporate due to time constraints, censorship, fear of alienating viewers, but you wish you could tell? We answered that we chatted about this a little bit, with respect to sort of seeing the lives of young parents reflected on screen. I'm wondering what else might come up for folks. And while you're thinking about that, I'll just put in context some research from the Gina Davis Institute, which basically finds that when children are part of families on TV, childcare comes up only 20% of the time. When families with two parents are reflected on screen, 90% of the time, the dad is portrayed as the breadwinner, even though in real life, it's more like half and half, or even, higher share of women who are contributing. So we know kind of what isn't happening now. But yeah, I'm curious for Jenna, who's asking this question, what else would you like to write about or see reflected with respect to parenting and pregnancy? I'll open it to anybody.
Well, I think before we started, I was talking to Stephanie and Vicki about that. When I went through postpartum, you just have these flood of thoughts and things that you don't expect. And I had a short film I made that, like, the character, the lead up is the character ends up revealing, like, I get why people abandon their child. It's a comedy also, so, but it's this dark thought of like, I can't take this anymore. You know, I think there's a way you can depict this stuff and still have so much humor and heart. And this character, you know, isn't actually abandoning her child, but it's like that feeling of this is too much. And I think the reality, you know, when you become a mom, the reality of that compared to like what is out there, what, you know, there's just not a lot out there. And I agree, Working Moms is great. Like, I know someone mentioned that in the chat, like that show is amazing. I just wish there was so much more. And it doesn't have to be like the main context, but like, if you think about, I know this is movies, but you think about how many like action movies there are, or even just like workplace comedies, like there are so many. And it's like, why can't we have more shows that also, you know, depict women and, you know, raising children and all of these topics more.
Yeah, a colleague of mine actually pointed me towards a scene in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier where there's just this passing sort of line or scene about the Will Smith character's like coming back to save the day, and she's like, no, like I was here taking care of our parents and I was parenting this child and I was like making our business continue to run, and where were you? You were off like fighting this supervillain, so like don't come here and tell me what to do. And I just thought that was also a really interesting example of weaving these themes into genre, into different genres where you don't necessarily expect it. I feel like comedy is another place where you don't expect it. And yeah, I think there's a lot. Any other things that come to mind before we sort of turn to a couple other questions and a wrap here?
It does seem it's getting better, right? Like I'm curious about, you know, that movie Night Bitch that's going to come out, and there was the Charlize Theron movie, right, about the night nurse, right? A while ago, it was written by Diablo Cody, I think, and she imagines the perfect night nurse, and that person isn't actually there, and it's about her own. Yeah, Tully. Thank you, Tully. It's about her own. I think it does feel like you're so right. You have to take an interesting, you have to disarm people and surprise them, because in a way I think whenever you get around, it's like electing women to be president, like people are just so motherhood, the whole motherhood thing, and like a woman can be sexual in the mother, like we're back to all, you know, that all still there, right? We're also like, don't go there because it's some primal child thing. And I think you're right. It's like the disarming thing is what works. The disarming things. And the other thing I'll say is like executives often fear these things, and then that turns out to be what people talk about and what they're interested in and what gives the show some bite. And I think as long as that keeps happening, like you look at Baby Reindeer, right? It's a pretty rough subject. And the more, there will always be comfort television where they get the bad guy, you know, minute 52, whatever. And that's great. That's fine to have that. Just keeping all those theater actors employed in New York. But I feel like the other side of comfort is like, if you really do something radical and it feels authentic, the audiences will totally show up for it. You just have to do it really skillfully, I think, and then they will show up. And that's part of it, right? Is like just the artistry of it.
Right. So one thing that came up in our prep conversation that we haven't really talked about is shifts in the industry around deprioritization of DEIA, which is also happening kind of in the world, the country, a focus on kind of pure entertainment and not entertainment that's for a purpose or a cause. Curious what Elena and Charlotte, you think that means, if anything, for the kinds of stories that we're talking about, and how do you overcome the resistance or concern to press for authentic, inclusive, and holistic representation in that context?
I mean, I'm hoping this is, you know, some sort of weird moment of like a backlash, I guess I should say. I wouldn't say I'm not, I am Latina, I'm Mexican American. So like my stories always have a Latina in them, because I often write from a personal point of view. There's usually a character who's kind of like a proxy for me. And that's inherently in my shows. I think, I mean, I don't know. I guess for me, I'm just pitching from my point of view and try to have a very like inclusive cast always as well, like in my mind when I'm writing these characters. But I mean, that's about all I can do. I do whatever I can do for that. And also my hope is like, if I can become a showrunner, like then also I have the ability to hire more, you know, make my room look inclusive as my group of friends and people I know.
Charlotte, thoughts on the DIA issue and entertainment?
I think one good thing about morning show is anything happening in the industry that annoys us, we just try to put in the script, like they can talk about it. So that's a nice outlet for us, and you know, because they're in a big corporation, so they're obviously going to talk about like what are the hiring practices and all those, you know, things directly. Yes, I think again, it's just it's very annoying that this is the case. So again, I want to say this is not natural. This is a system that has been put in place that is not right. But I still feel if you pitch or show an undeniable thing, no matter what it's about, somebody will respond to that. I do think if the storytelling is strong, or you make the horror movie about motherhood or whatever you do, like people will recognize. I do think people will recognize when things are true and they come from inside you. I think people can tell when something is genuine. You know, sometimes they don't want a genuine thing. Sometimes they want, you know, just the made up reality show. That's fine. Everyone's exhausted. But I think people can kind of tell when it's bullshit and when it's not. And I think they'll be like, oh, that thing. Like that was real.
Yeah.
So I think there's avenues of hope. And the more those things people talk about those things, the more like I am sure everyone's like, what's the next baby reindeer? We got to find it. We think of like, I may destroy you, you know, the HBO's like those things there'll always be something like that will break through, and there'll always be some young executive will be like, I want one of those. So it will continue to, I just think I'm not sure anyone's any more afraid than they were like 5 years ago, I think they're always afraid. They're always driven by fear, you know, that's just the nature of the business, I think. And it's more on text now than it used to be, but I almost think it hasn't changed since I've gotten here. You know,
Thank you
it's
for
still
that.
like, you know,
Yeah.
it's still a lot of white guys named Jack on Amazon, you know.
Well, I like the glimmer of hope that you offered there and sort of the advice. And I want to just close us out with asking you sort of each for one thing that you'll take from this conversation and one thing or a thing that you would like to impart to writers who are watching for inspiration about the kinds of stories to tell or how to tell those stories. And Elena, I'll go to you and then to Steph and then back to Charlotte, and I'll wrap this up.
Yeah, well, you know, it's so nice to be a part of this, because I definitely have moments where I'm like, ugh, I'll just, you know, I have meetings with different producers all the time trying to find like what my next project is. And I do have like a couple ideas that revolve around parents. And I've literally had a meeting with like a studio head, and they were like, don't bring up anything about parenting. They don't want to hear anything about, and I was just kind of like, that's such a bummer. But it's nice to have this conversation, because it does make you feel like, no, these stories are worth pushing for. And, you know, even if just like one of the things in my development slate, to still push forward on that, because in my gut, it's what I'm excited about. You know, one of the stories I'm so excited about. So yeah, so thank you guys for putting this together.
Yeah.
I know we're talking about abortion, but I'm like also like just parenting is.
Yeah.
Abortion and parenting are very connected, so it makes total sense. I think the one thing that I would share again is just that abortion is popular, and I think you're totally right, Charlotte, that there's a lot of fear about that and a lot of misinformation, and the sense that abortion, including abortion in a show in any way, It's not just a risk, but kind of like a liability. So just, sharing all of the polling and all the data, and just abortion touches everyone's life in some way. It's a very relatable issue. And it's about all of the, brings up all the big life questions. So finding ways to incorporate that. And I actually, my favorites are the abortion comedies, like the BoJack episodes, Glow, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Jane the Virgin, like all of those that really skewer abortion restrictions. They're just such fun, creative ways to incorporate abortion into shows. So it's just very cool to hear about your processes, Elena and Charlotte. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Charlotte, any final thoughts to take away from this or to impart on other folks?
I don't know if I have any wisdom. I'm with you, Elena. I'm very grateful. I mean, I think you do get into this tunnel vision. You're just literally trying to get the thing done on time. Like, okay, is this actor going to say this line tomorrow? Or are they going to get on this floor and go, I'm not saying that line? Like, so much of your life is about that, that it's great to sort of take a breath and go, I was like, oh, I'm so busy. I'm gonna be at work so late tonight. And I'm like, oh, how much I needed this. Like, this is such a gift to just go like, oh, that's right. We're incredibly privileged to be able to tell these stories. And it's great to have just a commute, to stop for an hour and say, like, we're in a community where we can all be very different, but we can all just go like, yes, this is really important and we could do more. I think it's just, you feel better. I mean, I look at there are people with me. I'm like, yay, it just does give you energy, and you really do feel like, oh, I'm gonna go out there again and apply myself to do everything I can do. So I'm very grateful to that. And I agree. I just, again, say, like, it's writing something costs almost no money. And so everyone listening to this, if you have a story, you should tell your story. Just tell
Yeah.
your story. Or
Great.
tell somebody else's story. Like, it's so important. Like, write the 1-page thing. It doesn't matter what it is. Do the stand-up thing for 2 minutes. Make the short movie, like, whatever. Just get out there.
Well, and it all creates this echo chamber and this forward momentum that I think leads to your point about, like, we just have to destigmatize all of this so that it isn't like a bad word or a difficult situation. And the more that we normalize that all of these things are connected, how we work, how we care, what our health decisions are, what freedoms we have, it becomes easier to tell those stories, and there's ripple effects into mass culture as well. This has been great. I feel so privileged to have been able to moderate this conversation with you all. We did have questions in the chat about other resources. So I want to plug Steph's organization and the Abortion on Screen Project. They have a ton of resources. We here at New America, if you go to newamerica.org/entertainment, you'll see all of our resources, many of which are around the parenting, caregiving pieces and how gender is represented, as well as abortion. And there are other, for folks who are looking for abortion stories, we Testify as an organization that has great abortion storytellers. There's a lot out there for folks who are interested in learning more and telling stories. There was a question about men and how men can write stories. Talk to people who have dealt with this. I think there's a big community of folks who want to help. So I am going to say thank you, and I will pass it back to Sanaz or Dustin to say goodnight. And just thank you so much for your wisdom, Steph and Elena and Charlotte. This has just been wonderful.